was a freshman in college at Illinois Wesleyan, and he was a student, and we were two Methodist PKs at Illinois Wesleyan in Bloomington. And then later, when Mike and I moved to Batavia, a few years later, his wife Danielle was my son's wonderful piano teacher all the way to his senior year. And a fine organist, Karl. I last saw Karl at my mother's memorial service in March of 2020. And you know, we all know what's happened since 2020. And so we're just now getting to see each other after this long pause. He's been a history teacher, high school level, right?
Middle school.
Middle school in Wheaton.
Yeah.
I don't know. And long been involved in the Chicago Architecture Center. And he gave a program last time for us on the architect who designed the beautiful Batavia Methodist Church, Solon Beeman. And he had this, we knew we wanted to have him back. And he had this wonderful idea, and he's going to share something later that's kind of personal to my family with this Chicago Post Office building. So I was excited when he wanted to do this, and I'm going to turn it over to Karl now. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's wonderful to see this many people here compared to last year when I was here, because there was nobody here. I feel kind of funny about talking because this is called Books Between Bites. And my topic today is the old Chicago Post Office, and nobody's ever written a book about the old Chicago Post Office yet. Okay? One of these days they are. But the library here has a number of really fine books about Chicago history. They talk about Chicago restaurants and the street names and the mayors and the crooks, the gangsters, and all of that sort of stuff. And they're really pretty good. In fact, I brought 3 of them with me. One of them is called Yesterday Chicago by Rick Hogan, who's been on the docket here in years past. It's a great book about Chicago, but there's no post office in it. And another book called Lost Chicago was written about 10 years ago. It's about all these wonderful, famous, beautiful, beautiful buildings that have been torn down. And the old Chicago Post Office almost reached that point. So I'm tempted to write a book about these were the buildings that are nearly lost, including the Auditorium Theater on Michigan Avenue. That one really came close to getting chopped down. They didn't have enough money to tear it down, so that's why it's still there. And then later Roosevelt University took it over. So, okay, anyway, I'm trying not to confuse everybody with too much stuff. But here, let's start with a little postal history. Some of you have probably heard this. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Anybody ever heard that before? Okay, yeah. It's on the walls of the New York City Post Office. It's not in Chicago. But it's not an American saying. The guy that wrote it was Herodotus, Greek historian back in 400 BC. It was before the U.S. Postal Service existed, okay? Now, weather did not keep, or until recently, keep couriers from their work, nor the location of the various local post offices. Here is a shortened list of some of the sites of the previous old Chicago post offices. First picture is from about 1830, John Kinsey, who, there's a street in Chicago called Kinsey. There's also a steak house called Kinsey Steakhouse. This is his log-constructed trading post. Was the first U.S. post office in Chicago. Not too advanced, but that's it. Okay, now here's a map of Chicago from 1830. You can see in the middle of the map is Fort Dearborn. There's the Chicago River. Lake Michigan is on the right. They have straightened out the Chicago River since then. If you go, it doesn't curve like that by the lake. Well, it's been straightened out. And the X at the top of the map is where the first post office was. Post offices have moved a number of times over the years. More of the old Chicago post offices on the move. 1834 there was one, 1838, 1841, 1853, those are the locations. And finally, in 1833, the federal government constructed an all-purpose U.S. post office and custom house. Government building was the two put together that remained until 1871. That one only lasted 16 years, and that's what it looked like. Looked pretty good, okay? But, oh, there's the horses and, back in those days. If it's an old picture, I got it off the internet. If it's a new one, I took it, okay? So, I wasn't around in 1871. My wife thinks I'm kind of old, but okay. The use of the U.S. mails is expanding as a nation and was growing. And Chicago was in the center of the country and a railroad center. Even back in 1871, the year of the Chicago fire, was a railroad center. Later, temporary, larger post offices were built at 16th and State and the Methodist Church at Wabash and Harrison. A new post office and custom house in 1880 is on the site of the current Federal Center in Chicago. If you're into architecture, Mies van der Rohe designed the Federal Center. That's where R. Kelly got convicted yesterday, if you watched that on the news, in the U.S. Federal Center in Chicago. This 1880 post office was grandly scaled in an Italian Renaissance style that looked like that. Was pretty swanky, okay? Wasn't big enough, and it had a problem because it had an inadequate foundation and it started to sag, okay? Chicago was built on a bog, most of you probably know that. And one of the tricks was, how do you make a foundation for a building in Chicago that goes down? Before they knew that bedrock was down 92 feet. And I can tell you about it later if you want, but it's a long story, okay? So they had to tear that one down. The next post office building, another replacement and expanded post office building, was completed in 1905. In between these two buildings, there was another temporary one on Michigan Avenue. This is the next one that they were going for, a big one. Designed by Henry Ives Cobb. On the same block where it is, where the Federal Center is today. Cobb was pretty famous in Chicago with a lot of neat buildings, including the Newberry Library. Probably some of you have been there. He also designed the Chicago History Museum on North Michigan Avenue, North Clark Street, and the Potter Palmer Mansion in Chicago. That's a pretty famous mansion because when it was built, they didn't have any locks on the doors in order to get, and there was no doorknob on the outside. You had to be invited to come and visit, okay? And he also designed Yerkes Observatory at Lake Geneva, which probably a lot of you have seen it. Sometime we can do a story about Yerkes, who was a crook, but he had a lot of money and gave a lot of money to the University of Chicago, so they named an observatory after him. This building had sort of survived until 1965. There it is. Some of you might remember it. Okay, it's right where the Federal Center is today. Beautiful, beautiful old building. The dome was compared to the dome on the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. It was really a striking, significant piece. These pictures are taken from Lost Chicago, the book that I have that tells you about buildings that aren't there anymore, okay? Just a magnificent building. And the tall thing in the back is the Board of Trade building with the statue of Ceres on the roof, okay, which was the tallest building in Chicago for about 23 years until they built the Prudential building. There's the dome, lovely. That's looking up inside the dome. Okay. By 1915, there was a need for another larger new post office building. Planning went on but was interrupted by World War I. By 1921, a new U.S. mail building was built as a parcel post center. This is packages, not regular everyday mail. The delivery of packages greatly expanded, especially due to mail order companies like, this is an audience participation time. What were the old mail order companies? Oh, wow, you guys are good. Okay, now who can tell me which was the first one? Montgomery Ward's, yeah, and it was the biggest one till about 1930 when Sears finally caught up and passed them. And then eventually they built stores, but in the early days there was no stores, it was all mail order. Okay, Spiegel, somebody said Spiegel in there too, that was one of the big ones. The new building was on the west side of Chicago River and built over railroad tracks. How many of you have ever ridden on a train underneath the post office building? Anybody ever take the Burlington from Aurora downtown? Yeah, it goes underneath it, still does. I was on it yesterday, underneath the old post office building. It's amazing how engineers could design a building that was 13 stories tall, that was built on stilts. And the weight of the building is just incredible. But that's what they did, okay? Now, the guy who's building this was the guy that started to cause all of the commotion why they needed a new post office building. This building is still there, 6 North Michigan Avenue. The tower got blown over years ago in a storm, but this is the Montgomery Ward building. This is where his office was and where his headquarters and where they stored all of this stuff till they mailed it out, and they mailed it at the old post office building. It's still there, and it's a condo. We're going to talk about repurposing buildings in a little bit, and most of the buildings on Michigan Avenue that you're familiar with are now condos. Okay, here's the first picture of the new post office building, the U.S. Mail building, which was parcel post, not regular first-class mail, built in 1921. On the left-hand side is where they loaded with trucks and carriages and stuff like that. On the right-hand side is where the trains are and still remain. To the left edge of the picture is where the Chicago River is today and still is, okay? This is the original building built in 1921. There's a photograph of it. They like to do postcards. You can see a little bit of the river on the bottom left-hand corner. And train yards, and more train yards, and more train yards, okay? Okay, this is a picture from the other side of the building where you can see some of the trains smoking in the old days and some of the old cars that they had. Okay, the current building is on top of all of this stuff. Between 1934 and 32 and 34, the U.S. Mail building was greatly expanded because of the need for a much larger facility. Well, one for packages and mail, regular everyday mail, mailing newspapers and foreign mail and all that. The new building was designed by a company called Graham, Anderson, Probst & White, and they built a wraparound building around the old building. It encompassed it on 3 sides. Okay, Graham, Anderson, Probst & White. Anybody ever heard of those guys? They did a lot of buildings in Chicago that you're familiar with. The name, when built, was changed to the Chicago Main Post Office. The new post office was dedicated in February 1934. Hoover was the president back then. They loved postcards, and this is one of the postcards from back then. They were thrilled with it. The street on the left is Van Buren. If you lived in Chicago or ever had to go there when it was time to mail in on April 15th, your income tax, that's the side of the building where they always had people out until midnight collecting your taxes so they would be done in time. The left-hand side of the building is 1 city block. In this picture, it doesn't look very big. On the right-hand side of the building, that's 4 city blocks, okay? So this is an immense building. There's a picture facing west, and all of the short part of the building was the original building, and then it was encircled by the larger building. Both parts were built by Anderson, Graham, Probst & White. Who are those guys? Okay, they worked for Daniel Burnham. Daniel Burnham was Chicago's greatest architect of the early 20th century, did buildings all over the place. He died in 1906 in Heidelberg, Germany. He was over there doing a contract for people over there and caught food poisoning and died over there. So what do you do with all of these buildings that are partly done that Daniel Burnham had started? Well, Graham, Anderson, Probst & White were all like pretty far up there in the company, and they said, we think we can finish these buildings, and we'll see some of these pictures. But there you can see what the building looked like a few years ago. I forgot, I was going to start with, have any of you guys ever ridden through this building? The Eisenhower goes through it, okay? Yeah, it was built, the old part of the building was built in 1921. And Daniel Burnham's plan, even though he died early, was to have a main road built right through the middle of the building, because his plan of Chicago was to, expand and just beautify the city and stuff. So they built the building thinking that someday they're going to put a road through the building. So the hole in the building was from 1921. When they expanded the building in 1934, they continued with a hole in the building. And some of you that are with it can tell me what year they built the Eisenhower. 1954. 1954. So the hole was there for that many years. Eventually, they're going to build the Eisenhower through it. Okay. There's another view looking at the building. This is from the east side. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful building. Then, 1996. The post office just ran into all sorts of problems. The mechanical systems that they had at the post office were antiquated. Supposedly in 1 or 2 days they got 10 million pieces of mail snagged up in their mechanism. And they go, oh my gosh, I don't know how we're ever going to get through this thing. At that point they decided to build the new post office building, which is across the street to the south. It's a really ugly, 2-story, utilitarian building. It's just nothing. But when the building was abandoned in 1997, this is what it looked like. Okay, broken windows, the facade is falling apart, and it was just terrible. It was just like an ugly stepsister. What are we going to do with this thing? Okay, the architects were Anderson, Graham, Probst, and White. Okay, there they are. And the first building that they built with their name on it, not Daniel Burnham's, not the buildings that they finished, was the Wrigley Building back in 1921. And William Wrigley was this pretty smart guy. They had just built the bridge on Michigan Avenue in 1920 that connected Lower Michigan and North Michigan didn't exist. It was called Pine Street. But a bunch of guys thought this is going to turn out to be pretty good. He got the piece of property right in the middle of Michigan Avenue going north. So if you're going north on Michigan Avenue, you see the Wrigley Building for, blocks and stuff like this. Great idea. Trump wanted the building, but he couldn't get it, so no, I'm joking. Okay, he built his building one to the left. But there they are, those are the principals. It cost $4.1 million, and it's one of the buildings in Chicago that still has a name on it. Okay, now here's some other buildings. The Field Museum, they finished. All been there. Union Station was under construction, they finished that. The Wrigley Building, U.S. Mail Building, Merchandise Mart, the John G. Shedd Aquarium, the Civic Opera House, Field Building, La Rabida Children's Hospital along the lake, and the U.S. Postal Central Building back in 1932. So those kind of bookend some of the stuff they did originally. Then they did, the last building was in 1972, and you'll all recognize it in a minute. Okay, here's the Wrigley Building. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's still there. It's an office building. The Wrigley Gum Company doesn't even have their gum thing in there anymore, but it's great. Acacia Counting, there's 5 different colors of terracotta on the front. The darker ones are at the bottom, and it goes up to the top, and the top ones, which is patterned after a minaret in Spain, okay, are the lightest ones. Wrigley wanted his building to be well known, so he put lights across the river from it. His light bill was $80 a night to light up his own building. And this is an old picture I found. This is when Wrigley Building stuck out. The Tribune Tower is across the street from it, and it wasn't there yet. If you look way up in the top right-hand corner, you can see Holy Name Cathedral. But this was #1 for Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. Then they did the Merchandise Mart, which was the world's largest building until the Pentagon was built. Okay. There's the red building. That's the last building that Anderson, Graham's, Probst, and White built in 1972. Then they all just retired. Okay. Now let's look more closely at the old post office before its renovations. What was it like before it was abandoned in 1996? Quite a few floors were mail sorting areas. Okay, this is big. Acacia Curious is 2.3 million square feet. Like the roof where I was last night for a party, there's 3.5 acres on the roof. So each of the floors is 3.5 acres, so it just goes on and on. Oh my goodness. They got a lot of stuff to do here today, don't they? Okay. Sorting. stuff like this. If you were a black person in Chicago in the old days, the post office was a great place to work because you were sort of treated equally. More sorting rooms, stuff like this. Now, I need Becky's help on this. This is some friend of Becky's. Becky, you want to tell us who this is? Where are you, Becky?
That's my mother's father.
Come on up.
My
Okay.
grandfather.
Becky's grandfather worked in the old post office building in Chicago. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
He was a railway clerk.
Yeah. And in the old days, when you were a railway clerk, among other things, you had to have a gun because people would break into the cars, and because the railway cars carried gold and stuff like this. Very distinguished looking. Look at those eyes. Isn't that great? Becky gave me these pictures, and I said I'm going to put them in here someplace, so she didn't know where. And then when he was all dressed up, ready to go to church, that's what he looked like. Very distinguished looking. It's Becky's grandfather. Okay, there were spirals all over the building because the mail had to go from one floor to the next floor to the next floor. And it was just where it was. They're still on the floor. You can see where the spirals were. They've been cemented over, but that's it. And eventually they would get spiraled down to the trains. There were 125 trains a day that picked up the mail from that building and took it all over the country. It's, Spiegel and Ward's and Sears. Some more of the sorting machines. When the building was abandoned, the guys that bought it got to keep all of the stuff that was in it. And they recycled all the metal stuff in here and got over $1 million for the recycling. So more sorting and, let's go between the floors. Another spiral. Now, in 1997, the building was totally vacated. A guy named Bill Davies from England, who was a very eccentric person, had an idea. He paid, and you read different places and you don't know what's the right answer, somewhere between $17 and $24 million for the building. Mayor Rahm Emanuel in Chicago was ready to do eminent domain and tear the building down because it was in such bad shape. Well, Bill Davies, who was an investor, bought the building and died the next day. Yeah. So plans, just nothing really happened there for a while on that, okay? In 2016, the building was sold, and there's different stories about that. It was $200 million or something like this, to a company called 601W, which you've probably never heard of. 601W has two other big buildings in Chicago that they own or control. One of them is the Prudential Building. Probably some of you remember the Prudential Building when you were a kid because it had the fastest elevator in Chicago. And they used to have the Top of the Rock restaurant on the top there and stuff like this. And they also own or control the Aon Building on East Randolph Street, which was the second tallest building in Chicago for a while. Okay. Now, the big deal on buying buildings nowadays is this thing called adaptive reuse. Okay, adaptive reuse. They take an old building, rather than tearing them down like they did in the old days, like they were going to tear down the old Chicago Public Library, they just buy it, fix it up, and reuse it. Okay? The 800 there is what they spend $800 million, 601W, $800 million redoing this building. And you go, okay, how does that compare to anything else? It was the most money spent on any private building in the United States ever to fix up an old building. $800 million. And it was worth it. Okay. The massive project is overseen by Chicago Office of Global Architecture called Gensler. And part of the team from the Gensler group, and we could spend an hour talking about Gensler. The lead architects were all women. So they wanted to make sure that the place looked good. Okay. Some other buildings downtown that have had adaptive reuse include the Auditorium Theater, which they were going to tear down. The old Chicago Public Library. Mayor Daley's wife Maggie said, no, we can't tear this building down. It's too gorgeous. So they built a new library and took the old building and turned it into the Cultural Center. Merchandise Mart building has been like total redone. And the Tribune building was sold a couple years ago for it's like $400 million. Tribune Tower was built, cost more than the Wrigley Building across the street. It was $5.4 million when it was built. It's condos now. The nicest condo in there is $10 million. It's still for sale. Okay. The cheapest one in there is $974,000 for a one-bedroom, one-bathroom condo in the Tribune Tower. So, okay, now let's look at the outside of the renovated old post office building. That's what it looks like now. Okay, they restored all the brickwork, all the limestone, all new windows, triple pane windows. You can't hear any street noises when you're in there, and you can't hear the boats on the river honking at you. That's what it looked like before. The windows it was just falling apart, you know. There's the Eisenhower going right through the middle of it. Okay, but you look at the building, like everything has been fixed. There's nothing left that needs attention. Now on the left-hand side is the West Van Buren side, which doesn't look very big till you get in it. Okay, they have a new logo for the building, a modern phoenix. Okay, the stairs are made out of granite; those are original. Okay, and it's a superb example of Art Deco. There's one of the doors. Art Deco guys like brass and marble and linear stuff. Now let's look inside the old, starting with the area open to the public. Now most of the building is not open to the public because it's an office building. You got to get some kind of permission to crawl through the thing. This is funny. Here's the old building directory, which used to list all of the businesses or the floors, what was on this floor and what was on that floor and stuff. Except they kept the old building directory thing, and they just put in there the modern logo in there. Phoenix. It's Phoenix, rose after the fire. There is the long hall. It's 435 feet long, and they cleaned it all up, polished everything. The people that work there take great pride in the building. They're always cleaning the floors and stuff like this. The only thing that they've changed in the main hallway here is now they have can lights in the ceiling. The ceiling is 38 feet tall, and on the right-hand side is where you used to buy stamps and whatever you need to do. On the left-hand side is are the doors to go out to the street, Van Buren. Okay, Uber is one of the biggest renters in the building, so there's always some kind of a workshop or conference going on. There are conference rooms all over. Okay. When the building was built, they always put their names up there who did these things. Okay, Herbert Hoover was the president back then. Graham Anderson, Probst and White is at next to the bottom, and John Griffiths and Company were the guys that were the builders of the building. They did a lot of buildings in Chicago. John Griffiths. The Methodist Church in Batavia is designed by Salon Spencer Beeman. Beeman designed John Griffiths' house on South Michigan Avenue. Sometime I'll take you there and show it to you. Okay. They also, Griffiths did Civic Opera House and Merchandise Mart. They did big buildings, okay, including the post office. Art Deco abounds. Here's a stylized eagle. Stylized means it's kind of two-dimensional, kind of, okay. What makes a building Art Deco? And I don't want to put you to sleep, but just in case you don't know this, okay. Art Deco sort of appeared in 1925 in Paris at an exposition, International aux Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes. Okay, they didn't use the word Art Deco until the 1960s. They didn't really know what to call it. It's kind of like if you were Bach and you said, "You write really good Baroque music," he'd look at you and go, "Huh?" They usually name an era after it's over, but here's some of the things that I put together as a list for you. Strong vertical lines, streamlined surfaces, including columns without bases and no capitals, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, they didn't use them, okay? Linear and geometric shapes, inside and out, repeated decorative decorations, including chevrons, those are those little arrows. The Chevron gasoline has got 2 arrows, okay? Chevrons go back to prehistory. Cavemen used chevrons in their caves, okay? And it's been used in military insignias for thousands of years. The Romans used it, okay? They also have pyramids and sunbursts and florals and zigzags, all that. It's sleek and non-minimal designs. Non-minimal, let's show off. Unlike Mies van der Rohe, who had this idea that less is best, and then the guys after Mies van der Rohe go, less is a bore. Okay, so They integrated art and architecture and sculpture, put it all together. One had magnificent libraries with a dose of glamour. You walk in there and you go, ooh, this is lovely. Now this is funny. Almost everything that's Art Deco has decorative mailboxes in the lobby where all the mail comes from above, the floors up above and come down. You've probably all seen those. Except the post office didn't. There's no mailbox in the post office, okay? They had decorative brass elevator doors and windows, brass exteriors, doors like I showed you before. They have terrazzo floors or marble, terracotta facade, sometimes in multiple colors. They love to just show off, in Bedford limestone exteriors and granite base floors. This is one of my favorites here. Art Deco buildings scream money, power, and progress. This is in a time when they started having more mechanical things to help build the buildings, and they just wanted to show the stuff off. The buildings were a kind of transition between Victorian and modern designs like Mies van der Rohe. It was short-lived, a movement in the U.S., mostly in the 1920s and 30s. It influenced fashion, architecture, fashion, art, housewares. I mean, your toasters, your refrigerators, your stoves, went through the Roaring '20s and into the Great Depression. And it quit pretty much, except for neo Art Deco, with World War II. Okay, there's the columns, some of the columns. No capital at the top, no base at the bottom. Okay. Grand lobby, marble inlaid. They were able to fix it up. Just really nice. Now this is kind of cool. Okay, I don't know of another building I've ever seen that has this. You have to have HVAC, and they even had air conditioning somewhat in the old building, okay? These are ways that your mail was delivered in the past. And they're made out of brass up by the ceiling, and one of them was a sailing ship. Another was a stagecoach. And all of that black stuff around the side of the pictures is where the heat and air conditioning came out, okay? And still does, okay? Pony Express, railroads, steamships, airplanes, and the only one they missed was helicopters. When this building was still used as a post office, they had helicopters that came every day and picked up the mail, the air mail, that went right to Midway Airport because O'Hare wasn't really done yet, okay? They had to give up on helicopters because the helicopters got bigger and weighed too much, so they couldn't do that anymore. Okay, here's Chevron, one of their many radiators, grills that they've got. Just beautiful brass work throughout it. Another beautiful brass thing. This is an Art Deco. This is where you can see what floor the elevators were on. It doesn't work, but it still looks nice, and you're not going to just take it out and put a piece of plastic over it. So, okay, what do some of the floors do or did? Okay. The main floor was retail, wholesale, stamps, general delivery, special delivery, money orders, lock mail boxes where you went to pick up your mail at the post office. Postal Savings Bank. This was kind of an interesting thing. Back at the beginning of the Depression, there were over $38 million in the Postal Savings Bank in that building in Chicago. They had an information counter, the contact person between the postal employees and the general public. It was on the main floor. There's 12 main floors in the building. Second floor is where we received stuff that was 1,100 feet long. It was on the right-hand side. That wasn't particularly pretty, but that was it. Outside parcels could not be handled in mail sacks due to the size of contact, so they had to put them up there. Special delivery, about 4 million parcels and special delivery letters were handled annually back in the 1930s. Fourth floor, delivery division handled mail destined for local Chicago delivery, okay? Plus the office of the postmaster, the assistant postmaster, superintendent of mails, the administrators. This is interesting. They had a canteen which could serve up to 1,600 people a day. They had a staff of 100 people and it was open 24 hours a day. Because in the old days, mailmen or mail people worked 24 hours a day. At night, they always had a full crew. Also had a credit union, first aid station, and a branch of the Chicago Public Library. It was in the fourth floor. That floor was like friendly for the workers. Parcel post was on the sixth floor. Roughly 1.7 million packages a day went through there. Sears, Montgomery Ward, Spiegel. Also, this is cool, a rewrap unit, the repackaged parcels that come apart and damaged in transit. okay? Some of us have received that recently, okay? 7th floor mailing division, they were separating parcel post and mails. In a foreign section, they handled around 70,000 letters and 35 parcels a day, because a lot of people in the old days were from European and other countries, including mail, newspaper, and from foreign countries. 8th floor is a mail division, canceled and distributed first class and circular mail, newspaper, special delivery for out of town. The canceling machine, which is what broke, okay, handled and postmarked 32,000 letters and cards a minute. A minute. Or 4 million pieces of mail a day between 4:30 and 8:30 p.m. And because of that, they just had to close the place down. This is fun. 9. Mailbag depository could handle 3.5 million bags a year. Had a machine carpenter and mailbox repair shops, and if your mailbox got hit by a truck, that's where they'd fix them. Also the Nixie or Noin section, this is cool, whose job was to try to decipher the addresses that could not be delivered because the addresses were illegible. This is back in the days of Zaner Bloser, when people learned how to write, okay? Also lost and damaged and undeliverable mail, the dead letter office, okay? It was named the Nixie or 9th floor, or 9 in German, because 9 is the 9th floor, so that's all the stuff that you couldn't read with. They had about 40 people working in there, full time, just trying to decipher people's handwriting. Okay, if you go in there today, this is at the visitors center check-in thing. Unfortunately, you can't go through the whole building because it's an office building. You gotta have a pass and stuff, but you can get this far and past this too. On the right-hand side here, you can see that round gold plate, okay? That certifies that it's a LEED certification building, which means it's very energy efficient, very energy efficient. They're a gold, they're not a platinum building. Platinum is higher. But, this is one of those things when you have visitors, you brag about it. We're a LEED building. Here's one of the many old spirals in the main floor, okay, and in other floors. They fill them in with concrete and polish it. So if you don't know what it is, you go, I wonder what that was. Well, that's where it went through the floor down to the train underneath you, okay? Now, it's an office building. They want to make the thing friendly and open to the workers and to the public on the first floor at least. And there's all these little spots where you can stop and talk or eat a candy bar or something like that. This is where you used to have where you had locked mailboxes. So if you came in to pick up your mail, that's where it is, and those are gone. So they put this there instead, okay? There's some more nice places to gather all throughout the building, okay? There's one right off the main aisle. This is a cool one, okay? They like to recycle stuff, and this was an old desk or counter when you went to buy your stamps. So they recycled that, and the corner, the legs of the thing are part of what they recycled when they recycled the building and turned it into an interesting coffee table, okay? It's kind of what it looks like. It's really very, very pretty. At the end of the hallway, there's some doors. It's very Art Deco and stuff. On the right-hand side is a Walgreens. Okay? You get to those doors and you go, You don't want to go through those doors. It's not because it's Halloween. It's because you're going to be on the Eisenhower and you're going to get hit. So the doors are locked. You can't get through there. Okay? There's the new Walgreens that opened in May. It's doing pretty well. And inside Walgreens, it's kind of funny. Because it was a post office and they had a lot of insured pieces and stuff like this, there are 12 different safes inside there, or like in old banks and stuff like this, where they had to lock up stuff when it was being transported. This is one that's just in Walgreens. They decided to keep it, and everybody sticks their nose in there and go, wonder what we could use this for. I got an idea. Let's put wine in there and lock it up. So, okay. Now, starting 2 months ago, the building is 98% leased. There's not room for a whole lot of other things to get in there. But because people don't work there all the time anymore, it's the modern way of doing things, they have to have places to attract people to go and work there, okay? If it was fully occupied on a normal day, which it doesn't, and I don't know if it'll ever happen again, there's room for 6,800 people to work there. 6,800, it's a big building, okay? On a normal day now, you get between 1,600 and 1,800 people that work there. One of my daughter's really good friends works for Pepsi. Pepsi has a big headquarters in there, and they're required to show up twice a week to work. Most people would rather stay at home because they were used to it, you know? But this is the food service. There's about 6 restaurants on the first floor that are opened that have reasonably good food. I had a chicken sandwich there on Tuesday, and it was supposed to taste better than something from New Orleans or something, and it was okay, but it wasn't great. It was $15. French fries were $3.50, but a lot of people who work there are rich. So anyway, there's a food service that has opened 2 months ago. There's all sorts of places you can go and eat, okay, that are really nice, and 2s and 3s and 4s and 1s and stuff like this. And Uber is the biggest renter for the building, and their name is like all over the place. Now, let's visit the not open to the public restored areas, okay? You can take the escalator up to the 3rd floor and see what's up there. It's kind of funny because everything's built up, including the escalators are up like 7 steps from the main part, because you can't go down because there's trains down there that are still working, so they just build it up. From the top of the escalator, this is kind of the view you've got. Just a lot of open area, a lot of really nice things to look at, okay? They have a new mobile that's really kind of cool. Here's a close-up of it. What was the inspiration for the mobile? Okay. The old elevator shafts are still there. They all have modern elevators in there now. And this is the working part with common brick and all of that, so it's like that. This is cool. They have a zip code wall, okay? Now, when you put in all these offices, they had to put subdivisions between the offices, so they came up with a lot of really clever ways to subdivide the space. This is a wall of zip codes. Now, this one, if you can see, it says next to the bottom line, AL 36109. Those are real zip codes. In fact, not only that, that's my brother-in-law's zip code in Alabama. So my brother-in-law's zip code is in the old post office building in Chicago, okay? Then other ways to divide the building up, they put postcard walls up, okay, with all sorts of old postcards that are really, really lovely. And I asked the guy, I said, okay, were these postcards that fell like between the desks and the walls? I mean, is this stuff you found when you were recycling the building? And the guy sheepishly said, no, they weren't, okay? They bought them all on eBay. But it looks nice, and it separates offices. So, and you get these nice wide open spaces. People can go and talk and have a good time. There's the library. Okay, there's the new library. It's not a branch of the Chicago Public Library. Sorry, George, it's not a public library, but it's full of books and stuff like this, and it's really kind of a neat place. They don't have phone booths anymore, but people need to talk on their cell phones, so they have a lot of these little niches along the wall where it's a stylized phone booth where you can go in and be quiet. Okay, here's kind of the playground area. You can go play pool and talk to your friends, look out the windows, and all these windows have been replaced, and you can't hear any street noise in there. It's just lovely places. Ping pong table. This is in a room by itself because it's too hard to chase ping pong balls down the way. Yeah, you can see this is an old floor that they just patched and polished it. So, pool if anybody wants to play pool. This is a bocce court. Okay, you can go and play bocce ball, or the Phoenix is in the middle of the place. You got a gorgeous view of downtown. There's a river, and you keep looking over and see all of the neat buildings. You can see the federal building where R. Kelly was housed, still is, I think, today. Okay, boats on the river. Okay, more places to just go. I was not there at lunchtime this time, so it's empty, but at lunchtime it's pretty busy. They have a big bar. In the old days, there was this thing called Thank God It's Friday, TGIF. Okay, those days are gone. At the old post office building, thank God it's Wednesday. That's the day there are more people there than any other day. And these places are crawling with people at lunch. I got my chicken sandwich the other day. I was in line like at about 7 minutes to 12, and there were like 8 people in front of me. 12:02, there was a line down the hall behind me. I'm glad I came early because I like to eat early, but that's it. Okay. Here's one of the areas that has athletic equipment. You can go in and work out if you want to. If you're having trouble with your boss, they have a boxing ring in there. You go, hey, let me show you how to fix this. A problem, you know. Some more safes that they have. Okay. Now under the old post office, oh my goodness sakes, trains. They're still there. They don't smoke like they used to, but that's it. Going on right now, they're rebuilding Canal Street. Canal Street is on the right-hand side of this building, okay? I don't have any idea how people restore an old building. I have less of an idea. How do you take a street out that is an active railroad yard underneath it and replace it? And you go, oh my gosh, some guy smart's got to be able to figure that out. The head of the construction company, a guy named Anderson. Okay. There are the trains. And I don't know how long it's going to take till that gets finished, but you know, they're working on it. They yesterday poured some concrete. It was interesting. Some of you have hoses at home, like a drip hose. Okay. They had the drip hoses on all night long so that the concrete seats really well when they're done with it. But you know, let's just tear up a big chunk and put in new beams and stuff like this. Now, this is cool. It's the only building I know of that's got anything like this. The Meadows. It's on the roof. Okay. There's the old building facing west. Okay. The Eisenhower's right underneath there. University of Illinois Circle is that building that's left center a little bit, like at 11 o'clock. Big roof. Let's do something cool with it. Let's make this noteworthy, okay? They transformed, it's 3.5 acres of roof. And they have Art Deco sculptures on the roof, okay? The thing that's sticking up on the roof is where the elevators come. It's got a great neighborhood to live in or work in. There's the Union Station, which Anderson, Grams, Probst, and White finished because Daniel Burnham died. On the left is a brand new BMO Harris building. Okay, it's been open for a month. They don't have any restaurant in there that's any good. On the right is the building where the Secret Service supposedly meets. They won't tell you that, but I think that's true. Okay. Then from the roof, there's Sears Tower. Okay, and the building on the right is 311 South Wacker. It's the one that looks like a diamond ring. Okay, so they're in kind of a nice neighborhood. Sears, or Willis Tower, I still call it Sears, recently spent $500 million upgrading the building, and the post office was $800 million. Okay, the skinny little thing, kind of in the middle with a little statue on top, is the Board of Trade building with a statue of Sears on top of it. You know, nice neighborhood to be in. And if you work there, you can go up there and have your lunch every day. Okay, there's some of the greens. This was taken in the spring, so it's not as green as it is today. Okay, but you know, just a lovely place. Anybody want to go play tennis at your lunchtime, or anybody want to go play basketball? And they have 3 beehives up on the roof. I didn't hear of anybody getting stung last night, but they warned people, just look out because there are active beehives up here. Just walk around. It's got a place you can go jogging. So these are all amenities for the people that work in the building. Okay. Drinking fountains outside. Where you see where the basketball court is kind of the center of the fundraiser last night, and all over too. The top givers were expected to give $25,000, and then $20,000. If you gave $25,000, you got to come early from 5 to 6. Okay, wined and dined them definitely, and then they got the cheapskates at $20,000 and less that could come at 6. Okay, they had somewhere between 550 and 600 people at the fundraiser last night. I caught a picture. The women were, of course, dressed magnificently. Okay, that was last night. Checking in and getting their badge and getting a pass for the thing. This was up on the roof last night where the fundraiser was, the main part was. Some of the people up there that are standing around talking to all their friends and comparing notes. Okay, I thought it was funny. I was a greeter on the main floor, and for the first hour while all of the rich people showed up, they all just walked in, went up to the table, got their ticket, went up to the roof. As the day progressed, and it was more the cheaper people, way past my level, but the cheaper people, they'd walk in and look around and go, wow, this is really a beautiful building. But the rich people just walked right past it. So, okay, who are the tenants in its renovation? Okay, these are the big ones. Uber Freight was a big one. Walgreens, PepsiCo, CBOE, Chicago Board of Option Exchange, and then some of the ones that were there that are a little bit smaller. Milwaukee Tools, their headquarters is now not in Milwaukee, it's there. And here's the newest one from here on, the food hall and market where I had my chicken sandwich. Okay, but it's only been there 2 months. Okay, but those are some of the big ones. They like to advertise it. Okay, for our Pan Candy Company, if you drive the Eisenhower, you probably go past it in Forest Park on Harlem Avenue, but that's where their headquarters is now. Uber is the big one, so they got the big sign. Okay? Uber organizes moving stuff on trucks, and they have 463,000 square feet. I don't know how they could use that much, but that's what it is. So there's the building. It's significant. You can go in on the first floor and walk around if you're ever downtown. You really should go in there and just gawk at it because it's magnificent, and it was almost torn down. Okay, so thanks for your attention. I've only lost 2 people are sleeping on me, so that's pretty good. Okay? Hope you enjoyed my presentation about the old thing. If you have any questions or suggestions for future programs, I'm here. You can talk to me. Interested in a tour of the old post office building? Okay, I'm a volunteer for the Chicago Architecture Center, and they have a really easy address. It's architecture.org. Okay, that you can go look up. And they had 85 different tours before the pandemic hit. I think they're up to around 50 or 55. It's definitely coming back. There are more people downtown Chicago. I was not shot this week or carjacked or anything like that. And you know, it's coming back, which is really pretty good. Or if you want a private tour, come see me, I'll give you a private tour. I do that for groups of like 10 or 12 or 1 if you want to go private. If you're on my tour, you got to buy me lunch. Yes, ma'am.
For whom was the fundraiser?
The fundraiser was for the Architecture Center.
Oh, great.
Yeah, their goal was, I think, $1 million, and I think they went way past it. Okay, they were still printing name tags for the people that were late in getting their donations in at 3:30, but they supposedly made about 600 name tags, and if you go like $2,000 a piece at 600, you're over $1 million. You know, so they did quite well, I think. You know, maybe it's in the paper today. I haven't read it yet. So yes, sir.
Where do they park?
Okay, when this guy, Bill Davies, was going to redevelop the building, okay, some of you might remember, the floors are 6.5 acres each. There was room in there in his plan for 12,000 cars parked inside the building, okay? Now there's a parking section in the back of the building, which is really hard to get to because of the street is all torn up, you know, unless you know you're zigzag through the building to get there. But there's not really a whole lot of parking, maybe 800 cars, you know, that it's inside the building and back, you know, up the ramp and stuff like this. But if you go from Batavia, take the train downtown because the train's cheap and parking is, and it's a block from the train. So it's a great walk. So yeah, somebody else had
every day, Karl.
What's
Yeah.
the address? I mean, I go down to Union Station several times and I never noticed that there was no.
Okay, if you take the train to Union Station, you get out at Canal Street and you go 1 block south on Canal Street and it's right there. It's kitty corner from that building. The BMO Harris Bank is on the corner, and it's right across the street. Just be careful, because they drive like nuts because of construction down there. If it says walk, look before you walk. So, yeah.
I just want to, you go in every day?
No, I usually go once a week or every other week. Tuesdays is my main day of going downtown, because I enjoy it. I have fun. Okay, this week we had people from Montreal, Toronto, Mexico City, all over the place, and it's fun. Oh, and one of the things about Chicago is that the Chicago is flat and boring. There's no hills or anything like this. You don't come to Chicago to see the mountains and stuff like that. But instead, the architects over the years, particularly since the Chicago fire in 1871, have built magnificent buildings all over the town. And that's why they come. A year ago, it was kind of funny. I was talking to some guy that came to town, and he had tickets for the Bears game and the Bulls game and the Architecture Center. The Bears lost, and so did the Bulls. So, come see the architecture. It works. Yeah.
I wonder whether you want to say a word or two about Open House Chicago.
Open House Chicago is coming in October. It's, I think, on the third Saturday. I can't go this year or help either. There'll be a big ad in the Tribune, and it's on architecture.org, and there's open houses in all sorts of buildings. It's several hundred buildings that are not normally open to the public. You get to see inside the buildings, and it's great. It's called Open House Chicago. It's about the 10th year this year that they do it, and it's got lots of people that come from the city and the suburbs and visitors from all over. It's on a Saturday and a Sunday, both. So that's a good, yeah.
Is the roof open to the public?
No. Yeah, unless you know somebody. If you go on a tour, they'll take you up there on a tour. And it's something to behold. Nobody else. The City Hall's got a green garden on the roof, but it's kind of crummy compared to this one. So, yeah. Anything else? Well, I made the time. Becky, I got 2 minutes to go. Anybody else wants to come up? Mary?
The current post office, I know it's just that smallish, flattish building.
Right.
Where did the rest of the post office go? Is there just that much less use nowadays? I mean, it used to be huge, and now it's just so nothing. So
Yeah. The new building is just to the south of the old building. It's across the street, okay? And it's only 2 stories, and it's big. I mean, it just goes south of there, probably 3 or 4 blocks. And because they've got modern processing equipment, they don't do as much hand stuff.
No catalogs.
I'm sorry?
No catalogs.
Yeah, no catalogs is right, okay? Now, the thing that's, every so often as a geek, you go, okay, in order to buy a stamp, you have to go up to the 2nd floor. There's no stamps or anything on the 1st floor when you walk in the door, and you go, somebody goofed on that one. That's really kind of stupid, but, so, they didn't ask me, so. Well, thanks, you guys have been a great audience. This is fun.